All of a sudden, the Menendez brothers, there's a new interest in these brothers that ended up killing their parents back in the 80s. And up until yesterday, I couldn't figure out why all of a sudden, man, all eyes are on Menendez.
And then I didn't realize until I watched the documentary. So this is separate from the Ryan Murphy Monsters show, which is scripted. This is an actual documentary about the Menendez brothers. And there was this resurge of interest because of teenagers on TikTok. So they were taking a look at this story and what the brothers alleged their parents did to them. And I think because of Gypsy Rose Blanchard and her getting released from prison, they were like, she was abused by her mother. She did what she did, somewhat in self-defense, and now she's out. The Menendez brothers did what they did, somewhat in self-defense. They deserve to be out as well.
Yeah, if you are listening to this like later in the show on a podcast and you got kids in the car, we're probably going to be talking about things they don't want to hear. So that's your warning right there. So I went into this documentary because Mo and Kristen have been talking about it in studio for a couple of days now. And I'm like, I started to watch Monsters and I lost interest in it.
Same.
But then I watched the documentary based on your guys' excitement about it last night. And I felt my attitude changing about the whole thing pretty quickly, but I was conflicted.
See, same. And so it's so crazy, like what you remember, right? And granted, I was 10 when the murders took place.
This was 1989, so I was drunk and high.
Yeah.
But I was a lot older than you.
And you don't remember much of the trial. There were two trials because the first one ended up in a mistrial. And then in the second trials, both the brothers were found guilty and sentenced to life in prison, right? But when you watch the documentary and you see, one, the differences between the two trials, that in the second trial, they either had first degree murder or they get off. There's nothing in between. There's no like second degree involuntary manslaughter, none of that. And then I had no recollection of what Eric and Lyle said on stand in regards to what they alleged their father did and that their mother did nothing to stop it.
And if you haven't watched it or don't know the story, the question wasn't if they did it. Yeah. I mean, that wasn't part of the court case. They definitely did it, right? Mm-hmm. It was just how were they going to be punished and why did they do it? And would that have something to do with the sentencing?
So, and I will readily sit here and admit, when Abby first talked about the Monsters show, and no, that wasn't it. She was talking about Kim Kardashian because Kim Kardashian was with Ryan Murphy and they went and they talked to the Menendez brothers because she's all about like, you know, prison reform and the Innocence Project. And she said that she had met with Eric and Lyle and that she believes they should be released. Like they are not a threat to the public, that they have paid the price for what they did and that, you know, considering what their parents did to them, they deserve to get out. And I was over here kind of like, you know, whatever. You met with them for 10 minutes, you know, blah, blah, blah. But having watched the documentary, and I say this and I preface this because my husband gets on me about this all the time. You have to know who's behind the documentary because you can get a very skewed point of view. And I get that. But having watched the documentary and reliving Eric and Lyle's testimony of what they allege their father did and what their mother did not do to protect them, and then knowing how they've handled themselves in prison ever since they were sentenced and what one of the brothers is doing for child assault victims, especially of, you know, child victims of family assault. I sat there at the end of it like, yeah, I think they should be released.
If just let me pause for just 1 second, Mo, then it's all yours. There's a reason why we're not talking about some of the things that the parents or the dad did. They're just unspeakable.
It's so graphic, y'all.
It's so graphic, so disgusting, and so unspeakable that it's impossible for us to have a conversation about this on mainstream radio without either getting fined or grossing you guys out so much that it's not even proper.
But my mama heart was just like, it was hard to stomach. It was hard to hear. Now, again, all of this stuff had been said on the stand during the first trial when it was a mistrial. In the second trial, none of that was allowed. Like none of that, the jury didn't get to hear any of that. And so, you know, just hearing that and seeing that and watching these two brothers, you know, cry, and listening to them now, I really just feel like, yeah, they've paid their debt to society. and what happened to them is just so horrific. And I also thought to myself too, because it was such a graphic ending to the parent's life because of how many shots there were, I was like, that's a crime of passion. Like, that's not something like, hey, I want your money. That's, you did unspeakable things to me, and this is my last resort.
Yeah, so for me, I was so young when it came out that the only details I really remembered was how brutally the murders happened, and the shopping spree that came after. And that was really all I knew. So to me, I just always saw them as monsters, and that was the end. But then when I saw the resurgence on TikTok of a lot of teenagers saying, what if they were women? Would it have gone the same? And I'm like, wait, what? Mm-hmm. Why? How? Where are you getting that from? So that's what made me want to go back and watch the documentary. And then that's when I saw the details of the abuse, the alleged abuse. There was also the testimony from I believe it's called Menudo, which was like the children's group that the father was responsible for. And one of the children in that group alleges that the father did some of those same things to him that they allegedly did to the Menendez brothers. That's when I started to get a different take for it. And then when you hear them on a stand speaking to the details, which are so horrendous that you can understand how someone can get to a point of doing something like this, it changed my tune. On top of what stood out to me was, like, when you watch the first trial, they said that the jurors, it was odd how at that time all of the women felt like they should have got off, but all of the men felt like they should not have, because at that time, men did not accept that men could be abused. No one really did. No one thought that was a thing at the time. So if this trial were to happen today with what we know and how life has moved forward, maybe this would have gone differently. And then that's when I started to feel like maybe we should consider giving them a release.
Yeah, and I have a very personal hard line when it comes to this also. I told you guys, and I think some of you guys think that I'm joking about this, but I think when you touch a kid, you should be legally castrated, which is actually legal in like 11 states. I really think you do that, because I've known too many people that have had that happen to them, and I see the lifelong effects and struggle and challenges they have, and it's such a betrayal of trust when you do that to a child. Now you add the layer on that it's your parents.
Your own father
that is supposed to be the most protective person. So I went into the documentary thinking, look, murder is murder, man. You killed your parents. You should spend the rest of your life in jail. But after it, I understood it.
Yeah.
Then they thought that their life was on the line also. They thought that if they went downstairs, they weren't really sure what mom and dad was going to do. So they took the matter into their own hands. But when you look at the history of it, unspeakable things done to those. And I do think the way you do, they've paid their debt.
And I never thought in a million years, because it's just so crazy. I felt like I was so staunch. It's like, no, they did the crime, they do the time, they need. But then after watching that, I just think it's a reminder to open yourself up to like normalizing, changing your mind and taking in new information to alter your thinking, that you don't have to be stuck in one way of thinking.
Yeah, and don't get twisted on it. This is not the Monster series
that
was on Netflix. This is the documentary. It's a totally different thing.
The Bert Show.